Well, jury selection began a couple of hours ago in Sanford, Florida, in the George Zimmerman trial. We began our continuing coverage with the killing of Trayvon Martin and the trial of George Zimmerman with an update from some experts about what is going to happen today. Joining us today is criminal defense attorney Joey Jackson, who is a regular and a friend of Arise America. And also, we are joined by Jocelyn Cinquino. Is it Cinquino or Cinquino?
Cinquino.
Cinquino. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. She is an expert in jury selection with a consulting firm and is going to give us some insight in what starts today. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
A lot to talk about. So let's start off with you, Joey. What's happening today?
All right. What happens is, in any trial, you need a jury that's fair and impartial. If you don't have that, then it's ball game over. So, of course, the defense has their ideal jurors that they wish to select, and the prosecution, of course, has their ideal juror. If there is such a thing as an ideal juror, Debbie, I don't know about that. But ultimately, they just want to pick a jury who could listen to the case, who could be fair, reasonable, and render a verdict that's just and appropriate to the law.
And we're going to talk a little bit about what the defense and what the prosecution is looking for. Sit tight just one second, Jocelyn. So let me ask you, today,
Sure.
would there be a lot of procedural things, and a lot happened over the weekend, too,
yeah.
Joey? Update us there.
We should address that. What happens is that critical to this case is a 911 tape. Now, the jury will get to hear that tape, of course. However, the state, that's the prosecution, they want an expert to opine as to whose voice was on that tape saying, help me, help me. Why? Because if you're claiming self-defense and you have a victim who's alleging, saying, I beg you to stop, it goes against and it defeats your defense. Now, of course, the jury will hear it. The issue, and the judge reserved decision on this, is whether you will have an expert say that that was Trayvon Martin's voice. Even if, however, Debbie, an expert does do that, you could expect and anticipate that the defense will have their own expert saying, it wasn't his voice, it was George Zimmerman's.
And to make sure I understand, Judge Deborah Nelson, who seems to be very straightforward, no-nonsense kind of judge, she's reserved her judgment to make this decision later in the trial. What would it take for her to say, yes, you can let it in?
What happens is it's a Fry hearing, and at a Fry hearing, what they do is they determine the reliability. Is it scientifically reliable? You want a jury to hear things that have some value. And if the judge determines that, listen, you can't have an expert on speech pathology opine as to whose voice it is because it's not a reliable science, the judge will say, you know what, we're just not going to have experts on it. If the judge, however, concludes that it is a reliable science, the judge will invite the experts to give their views as to whose voice was on that tape. The defense, however, was putting their case together on Saturday, and apparently over video satellite, there was an expert that they needed who was stuck on a plane tarp, couldn't testify, so the judge said, let's begin jury selection, let's have the trial proceed, I'll reserve judgment, it doesn't affect you right away, and we'll get to that issue in time for, it to be considered in the trial. Okay,
we have so much more to talk about. We want to take a break. Again, sit tight, Jocelyn. Please be patient with me. We have a reporter who is reporting to us live from Florida. Jury selection has already started. The trial has already begun, and she has an update on what's going on. This is Susan McGinnis, who's reporting from us from Florida. Susan, it's good to see you this morning. What's been happening?
Hey, you too, Debbie. Good morning. Yeah, well, jury selection supposed to get underway about an hour ago, and there was a motion filed by the defense. Mark O'Mara asked that the trial be delayed. This is the third time the defense has asked that the trial be delayed. He wanted a few more weeks to prepare. Judge Deborah Nelson, for the third time, said no to that, and so jury selection was to go forward. After that, the court took a recess. This is as the jurors start to come in, start to fill out their questionnaires, start to meet with the attorneys, and to actually meet with George Zimmerman as well. They are then filling out written questionnaires, and after that, the actual interview process is going to begin. So these are some of the folks from this pool of 500 potential jurors who are the court's looking for 6 of them and 4 alternates who will end up actually sitting on one of the biggest murder trials that this region has seen. Trayvon Martin's parents also spoke just a short time ago. They said they are relieved that jury selection is underway and this whole thing is getting started. They called for peace in the community, and they said that it's time to put their faith in the justice system. So for now, we are in recess, Debbie, and jury selection will continue as the morning goes on.
Interesting development, Susan. There's been reports that there would be protests. Are there any yet?
Yes, there's about a dozen to 20 protesters here now in front of the court, and they've got some grassy areas where they have both sides pretty close to one another. So you know they are expecting some emotions to run high. Maybe not so far, no large-scale protests expected yet. But again, this is jury selection, so that's going to go on for a couple of weeks, maybe 3, and the entire trial is going to last more than a month. So protests are here, but they're pretty subdued for now. Some people were here over the weekend as well. There have been some complaints by civil liberties, by some civil liberties groups talking about some restrictions that have been put on protesters, what they're allowed to carry. They can't have any coolers or chairs or things like that. They're complaining about that, about a lot of restrictions put on them. So that's what's happening so far outside the courtroom. Also hundreds of spectators, and of course this whole little town has been inundated with media.
Well, if I can ask you a couple more questions, I understand that the county has a very interesting way of disseminating information to the public. Tell us about that.
They do. The court is awarding 4 seats inside the courtroom to clergy. Now, the idea is that the clergy each day can get the story of what's happening inside the courtroom and then bring it back to their congregations, and that they're hoping that that way the people of Sanford and the surrounding communities can get a truthful accounting of what's happening inside the courtroom. And the idea is that these clergy are sort of peacemakers, and so that they can bring a story to them that will help keep the peace and keep emotions from running too high. And that is, you know, they're sort of seen as peacemakers in this whole thing. They will rotate those 4 seats around all different congregations, all different parishes around this area.
Susan, have you learned anything about the temperament, the state of mind of George Zimmerman? Of course, we saw him in some of these pretrial motions. Hadn't seen him in a while. He seems to have gained a lot of weight. What have you heard about how he's doing?
We have not heard about his state of mind, but we can see physically he has gained a lot of weight. In fact, a spokesman for his attorney said that he has gained 110 pounds. He's now tipping 300 pounds. And he's sort of saying that this has been a very stressful year for him, and that is how some people handle stress. He also has been living in seclusion, so maybe that had something to do with it. We're not getting a whole lot of detail about his physical appearance because they are afraid that it may play a role in the trial. We're not really sure what that would be. Some are saying, you know, any kind of larger size can be a negative when it's a crime of violence that he's faced with. But again, they're saying very little about it. But it is very clear that we're looking at a very different man than we saw just after that shooting.
Indeed. Susan McGinnis reporting from us live from right there at the scene of the beginning of the trial of George Zimmerman. Thank you so much. And we will be talking to you again. Okay, so now we have heard, Susan reports a little bit of news, that there was a motion by Mark O'Mara, the lead attorney in the defense team, to delay this trial, saying they're not ready. Joey, what do you make of that?
You know, interestingly enough, you talked about the judge, Debbie, being no nonsense. Apparently the judge is. They've asked multiple times, we need more time to prepare, and that's not uncommon. I mean, we as lawyers, we want to be as prepared as we possibly can be, but the judge said, look, I set this time frame a long time ago. You've had the information that you've needed to move forward. Let's get started today. Motion denied.
There you go. No nonsense. All right, Jocelyn, you've been so patient. Okay, so all the action starts with the convening of the jury, the voir dire. Is that what it's called, Joey?
Absolutely.
Did I say it correctly?
You did indeed.
What are they looking for? Are they looking for demographics? What are they looking for in the people that they impanel?
I think, you know, really the focus, as it always should be, is on the jurors' overall mindset, what their life has taught them, rather than just focusing on 1 or 2 demographics, because that really doesn't tell us what a person is all about. There are going to be issues of race here, of civil rights, certainly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that just because a person is of a certain race that civil rights aren't very important to them, and important to them enough that they're influenced by what they think about those civil rights issues and how it applies to this case.
Talk to me a little bit about the questions that these jurors will be asked.
They're going to be asked a lot of very basic questions, and I understand the focus of the court and the strategy is to individually question these jurors, which is good. But they're going to be asked about their experiences with their jobs, with their spouses' jobs, that kind of basic background information, as well as their experience with law enforcement, what they think about police, and those kinds of issues.
And I understand they'll also be asked but like their views on gun laws, on gun reform, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And you know what's been interesting, because of recent world events and U.S. events, the perspective that people take on gun control has really changed. You've seen a lot more of a permissive attitude towards having guns. It's not so much about being limited in that respect. So the people that you would typically think would be against gun control don't always look like those people anymore because of what's happened recently and since this event.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but give me the profile, if you will, of the ideal juror from the prosecution standpoint.
Sure. Well, one of the things that we always look at, and I know you do this too, in jury selection is to be looking at the people who you don't want. Who are the people that you want to make sure you understand the other side is looking at? Because that's where you can use your 10 strikes. So in looking and putting myself in the position of the prosecution, I want to be mindful of the people who are like-minded with Mr. Zimmerman, who are comfortable with the decisions that he made. So I would be looking out for people who are active in organizations, maybe, and leaders at that, people who really take a proactive step in protecting themselves. Neighborhood Watch is at issue here. It doesn't have to be as literal as that. It can be people who take a proactive stand in school organizations or other things. Those kinds of joiners are very, very important to get.
Right?
Yeah, similar. You need to look for people who may have been victimized by theft, burglary, things like that, that put them on a high alert to take care of themselves, to really be proactive in making sure that they're covering themselves, because then they understand how Mr. Zimmerman was really on high alert to protect his community. Those are the things that they should be looking out for.
From the defense standpoint.
Where have you been on all of my jury selections?
I've been waiting.
You come now.
Right here.
So Joy, as I understand it, that each side gets 10 exemptions that they can reject a juror for whatever the reason is. How particularly do they use these very early on? I mean, there's 500 people coming in.
Sure. So what happens is you get what are called peremptory challenges, where you could challenge for, any reason or no reason, as long as it's not predicated upon discrimination in any way, excluding jurors predicated upon race, predicated upon gender. However, Debbie, very important, you get unlimited challenges for a cause. That means if you get a juror that says, I can't be fair, I can't be reasonable, I can't be impartial, I just can't decide this case, you as a matter of course can apply to the judge, notwithstanding your 10 objections, and say that juror does not belong here, and if you have a basis, the judge will exclude that juror because they cannot be fair. And that's the most critical element of a trial, to get a juror who can say and can be fair, reasonable, impartial.
You know, it's so interesting, the projection, and nobody's going to really know until this actually happens, but it's going to take a couple of weeks to actually impanel a jury, and that the whole trial is supposed to take a month. Well, that means the trial itself will last as long as jury selection.
I would suspect the jury selection will be a lot shorter than that. Now, you never know, because in trials you anticipate the unanticipated. That's how it goes. But I think they'll be able to get a jury, in less than a couple of weeks for sure, and they'll be able to get started, get the opening statements done, get some witnesses, and get some justice.
Joey, let me talk to you a little bit about strategy. It's very interesting of the charge that's been brought against George Zimmerman. It's that of second-degree murder as opposed to manslaughter or some of the other things. Why this charge, and how does it impact the likelihood of a conviction?
You know, it's huge, and I think it impacts it in a very significant way, Debbie, for this reason. Second-degree murder is very significant under the law, obviously. It's an action with depravity. It doesn't have to be premeditated. We know first-degree murder as premeditated murder. That means you were lying in wait, you planned it, there was a design to do it, you implemented it. Second-degree murder is George Zimmerman acted with a depraved indifference to human life. He just didn't care, and he was so reckless in his actions that he caused this death. Now, many feel that that's an overcharge by the prosecution because, as you say, Debbie, perhaps manslaughter or some criminal negligent type murder would have been more appropriate. I don't think many people believe that George Zimmerman was going and looking to kill anybody. Many people do believe, however, that he might have acted in a criminally negligent or reckless fashion, and that's the difference. And I think the second-degree murder really raises the bar for the prosecution and really makes it difficult for a conviction, at least as to that charge. But
Jocelyn, let me come back to you. The judge has already decided that the jurors will remain anonymous. The defense has asked that the jurors also be sequestered. What's the thinking there?
It's for confidentiality and safety. You know, one of the things that is even going to be critical in the jury selection process is that potential jurors feel safe. They are understanding that the gravity of the situation that they're being put into and just how serious their decision is going to be. They're walking into court already nervous and apprehensive about jury selection, and they're seeing protesters, they're seeing media influence. All of that may impact how out front and open they are about their attitudes about gun control and civil rights and these very sensitive issues. So making sure, one, that the jurors feel safe in sharing information about themselves and also feel safe as they're making that decision throughout the trial is going to be critical for them.
And very, very briefly, Joey,
Sure.
finally, of course, it seems like the defense has started to try some of at least their strategy, if not their, in the media leading up to this, with the release of all those photos and texts and videos and that kind of thing. Is it possible really to find 10 jurors that can be fair and impartial?
You know, I like to think helpless optimism, all right, Debbie? I do believe that there are jurors out there, and I think people have formed opinions and conclusions, but there are people who could be fair, decent, reasonable, and that's what our process depends upon. That's what we expect, and that's what I anticipate will happen here, that people will bring their preconceived notions. You can get people who would say, listen, let me evaluate this on the evidence in court, let me make a decision based upon what the witnesses say, and let me do justice and my civic duty. So I'm optimistic that that will happen.
All right, we shall certainly see. I want to keep our address and your contacts because we'll be talking to you again many times.
Look forward to it, Debbie.
Joey Jackson, thank you so much. Jocelyn
Absolutely.
Cinquino, we do
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you so much.